My absolute pleasure. I'm excited to have a chat with you.
Thank you. So, for myself and for those listening at the moment or going to be listening, I'd love to hear a bit about your past and your journey. So often people say like, "Tell me about your career or whatever it is," but I'd love just to hear about your journey to who you are now and who you are right now.
It's a long and winding road, so I'll cut out all the boring bits and share with you that I grew up in an immigrant family in working class UK in Yorkshire.
Hmm.
And my father was a real honest shepherd. He was actually a shepherd, a Greek Cypriot. And I had a Polish grandfather as well. So a bit of a mix. And I guess I always felt like the white sheep of the family. And I don't mean that disrespectful. I just felt very different to my family. And I never felt like I fitted in. And I always had a desire to, see the world and see what was outside of our small town. And the people in the small town that I lived really didn't understand that. And I thought I was a bit weird. And so I felt like I had to do something to see the rest of the world. So I studied law at school, and I thought that would be a great way of getting out into the world. I was always felt very ambitious. I did well at school. I was always bullied and picked on at school for my skin color. And I kind of never felt like I fitted in. And that really was a theme throughout most of my life. And so I tried to fit in law, and I
Mm.
worked in legal firms. I did whatever I could to get in there. Even studying law, I couldn't get a job, so I had to do other jobs in order to support myself. And I worked for free, I volunteered, I just did what it took, really. And I drove myself to succeeding. And I ultimately did. I worked for the top law firms in the world. And I thought, wow, I've arrived. I've arrived. Hurrah, I did it. And for a while, it was great. I did check in my soul during those years and was trained to have very black and white thinking. And so
Mm.
I was told constantly, you're too emotive in your writing. You're too, take the emotion out of it, take the emotion out of your advice. And corporate law doesn't really lend itself to much advice or much, softness or compassion or empathy. So it was a bit dog eat dog. And
Mm.
ultimately, I burnt out. I was doing 22-hour days on deals for months on end. Yeah, 22
22 hours.
yes,
Wow.
for months on end. And I would fall asleep at my desk. I'd wake up in the morning after a couple of hours. My secretary would arrive. She would buy me a new blouse. I'd shower at work, and then I'd keep going. It was insane. And I was traveling all over the world, business class and, living the life, so to speak. But I almost killed myself. And ultimately, I burnt out. I was in hospital. I suffered regular panic attacks. I lost 19 kilos. I was literally a skeleton. It was really bad. And then one day I was recommended to go to a meditation, and I'd never done anything like that. Growing up in Yorkshire, there's nothing like that. So it was very weird for me. But I guess I was at the point of I would try anything. I tried Western doctors, specialists, 3 psychologists, 5 doctors, specialists. No one could help me. So I went to this meditation class, and I remember going into the meditation, and it was all people who I just thought, I just felt so out of place. I just felt like, I didn't match up to them. I felt like they'd look at me in my designer suit and my heels and go, who is this person and what is she doing here? And thank God I didn't have any self-esteem at that time. So I didn't leave because I had no self-esteem. So I just thought I have to stay. And then the meditation teacher walked in, everyone starts shushing, and then he started leading us into meditation. Close your eyes. And I'd never done this before. So I didn't know what to expect. And in the beginning, I was like, okay, follow my breath. My mind was real busy. And then after a while, I just kind of, something happened and I just left myself. I disappeared and I was enveloped in this golden light. And it was the most profound thing I had ever experienced in my entire life. And it felt like I was there for just a few seconds, but in fact, it
Mm.
was an hour. And all I heard was coming back to your body, coming back to the breath. And so I kind of came back to my body, but I had this stupid grin on my face. I felt elated. I was in absolute bliss. And it felt like I'd taken class A drugs. Not that I've ever taken drugs. My body doesn't, I took a half a Barocca once and it was very messy.
Right.
So, and I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. I felt in bliss for 3 days.
Hmm.
And I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know what it was, but I wanted to learn more. So I started studying with the teacher, and there was a lot of synchronicities going on at the time. And he introduced me to spirituality and yoga and Ayurvedic medicine. I retrained. I went to India on retreat, and that profoundly changed my life. I found a guru. I wasn't even looking for one. I was like the most unlikely candidate, to go spiritual and have a guru. I was like, what the hell is happening to me? But I just fell in love. I fell in love with myself. I fell in love with the guru. I fell in love with life.
Wow.
And it literally, I did a 360. I walked away from everything I'd built. I walked away from all of the materialism that I thought was going to make me happy. And I dove deep and requalified as a yoga teacher, meditation teacher. I trained in energy healing. I trained as an Ayurvedic expert, so holistic science, holistic medicine.
Wow.
And I became happy, healthy. I found my purpose. It just fed me. It nourished me. And I was like, this is what I've been looking for my whole life, even though I didn't know I was looking for it. So that's how I'm here today. And now I basically help people find their own happiness, find their own mental, emotional, physical well-being, and release suffering, release
Mm.
organizational suffering, transform personal suffering, relationship suffering, social suffering, animal suffering. And
Mm.
it's all an inside job. What I learned from the masters that I studied with in India was it's all an inside job. Nothing outside of you will really move the dial.
Wow. And I have to know, what was the conversation like when you went back to the law firm? You're like, hey, I'm going to India to do this spiritual retreat.
I'm telling you, not just them, but my friends and my family lost the plot. They thought that I joined a cult. My mom said to me, have you joined a cult, love? And I was like, Mom, I am the happiest I've ever been. And I know this might be a bit freaky for you, but please trust me. I know if you can see that I'm happy and getting healthy, isn't that the main thing? And I think that really helped her. But yeah, all my friends thought I'd lost the plot. They were like, what? You're giving up, almost $1 million paycheck. And I sold my house, I went to shared living.
You went all in.
I went all in because, when you fall in love, like if you ever fall in love and you just go, that's it. People fall in love and they move countries or it was like that. And I just fell in love with life and what I was learning, all these Eastern philosophies. It was like food. It nourished me, and it became my center, and my place it was my sanctuary, and still is today.
Wow.
Hmm.
I think nowadays, like around this period, 2023, it isn't as weird in
Yes.
my words as it was probably when did you do all this? When did you go to the India
Oh,
and stuff like that?
it was around 16 years ago. So,
Wow, you're before the
yeah.
time that was like now people do it all the time. Like they go on retreats and they're prioritizing mental health and all these kind of things. But I think
Yes.
16 years ago that was like the pinnacle of like just work, hustle, grind, like don't just discard your health, right?
It absolutely was. And so I felt like a bit of a ninja, a stealth kind of go into places and pretend I was something else, but couldn't really talk about mindfulness or meditation. It was a dirty word. Yoga
Mm,
was just about starting in companies. So I could speak in yogic terms to people and they kind of understood it, but not really. And so it's really exciting that mental health, well-being, all these words, mindfulness is now becoming more commonplace, especially in the workplace. And
mm,
there was no one more kind of logical and rational than me. Like I had any emotion battered out of me being a lawyer. Everything was black and white.
mm,
Lost contact with my emotions, myself, even my caring, nurturing emotions and sensibilities and natural instincts, they had all been trained out of me. And so it took a long time for me to defrost my heart. It took many years for that to happen. And it had devastating effects on my relationships with my family, with my partners at the time. I became like a
mm,
robot. And so, when you come back home to yourself and what's really meaningful, you don't want to go back. No amount of
mm.
money would have made me go back. I was offered like crazy amounts of money to go back as a lawyer in-house with companies, and I was like, no way, forget it.
Mm. So, what's it like being a lawyer? Like, because we all have our preconceived notions, and some people might watch Suits, for example, which is a show on law, and
I
you
see.
see, you know Suits. Have you seen it before? And
Yeah.
I get that's it's a just a storyline, whatever. But what is it like being a lawyer? Like, run us through that, because that would be very interesting to know.
For me, I can't speak for all lawyers. I think
Mm.
people, first of all, associate being a lawyer with litigation, and not all lawyers litigate. And I wasn't a
Yeah.
litigator, I did corporate law. So I specialized in buying and selling companies, hotels, hospitals, um, mergers, acquisitions, and public listed companies. I'd worked for public listed companies. So it was very dry. It was very driven, very ambitious people. And it was all about the bottom line. And it was very, very high pressure. And in those days, it was very male dominated. So I typically would be the only woman in the room when I was going in negotiating these $1 trillion merger contracts. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and I'd have a junior with me who was male because my whole team would be male, my peers and juniors. And I remember once going into a room. I traveled to Frankfurt for the day to do a negotiation on this deal, and I had to negotiate aircraft warranties, and knew nothing about aircrafts, and I was absolutely bricking it. But I had this pretense, I put up a front and I'd had my mask on and I'd got can I swear, my stuff together.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, yeah.
I got my shit together and went with my junior. And we walked into this room and there were 30 men around this massive table. And they
Oh,
all went up
jeez.
yeah, they all went up and shook my junior's hand first. And they assumed I was the secretary.
Oh, wow.
And that happened time and time again. And I used to kind of get a bit of a thrill out of saying, actually, no, you're going to have to deal with me. And, typically we would be negotiating those warranties for hours and hours and hours and hours, riding through the night. And then we'd come back the next day after a couple of hours sleep and keep going. So it was just rounds of negotiation. And then I'd have to go away and edit, I don't know, 300-page document. That would be one document, and run a whole team of people doing due diligence. Like the pressure was on. And we were told constantly, you have to be perfect. Your advice has to be perfect. Your drafts have to be perfect. There is no room for error. So ultimately, personally, I took that on as I have to be perfect as a person, and no one can live up to that bar. But I know that perfectionism is rife in the legal industry. And that's why mental health and issues with mental health is so high. Suicide rates are so high in the legal industry because there's this unspoken bar that you have to be perfect. And often
Mm.
lawyers will take that on as well. I have to be a perfect person. And no one can ever match up to that. It's just
Wow.
impossible because we are imperfect.
Mm.
So yeah, it was very difficult.
Yeah, wow. And how does one find that balance, do you think, like between, because, like some people want to be lawyers, some people want to do that.
Mm,
Like a quote that comes up for me is from Alan Watts, and he says in his audio book series, Out of Your Mind, he goes, what I call a real swinging human being is one that can live in the two dimensions of reality, which is that you are everything, like you are of this world and you are the world,
yeah.
meaning that you can fall in love, you can have a huge ego, you can negotiate or whatever it might be, do all these worldly things, but
Mm,
deep down at its core that you're more than all these things.
mm,
So I guess I'm really asking, like, how does one embrace that?
yes, it's a really great question. And where does one start with that answer? If you think of the Buddhist teachings, they talk about detachment. This is a much misunderstood teaching.
Yeah.
Um, Often people think detachment means letting go of the world, letting go of materialism, and basically living in a cave and chanting or giving all their worldly goods away, and detaching from relationships, detaching from the world. And it actually doesn't mean that at all. What detachment means is detachment from the self that we have identified with, which is the ego self. So I would say, think about who you think you are. And then often, and I'll ask my clients this, I'll say, who are you? And they'll start by saying, well, I'm a lawyer, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a woman, and they roll off all these roles. It's my role, my role, my role, my role. And I'll just keep asking the question, well, who are you? Who are you? And they get to a place where they finished all the roles and then they go, I don't know.
So you're saying rolls is in food, they finish all the rolls.
Yeah. ROLE. Yeah, all the
Yeah.
roles like we adopt and we identify self as those roles. So when I was a lawyer, if someone said to me, who are you? I'd say, I am a lawyer.
Mm.
And the detachment comes from understanding that we're not our roles. We're actually a soul having a human experience. And our incarnation and life is a divine setup. It is literally a setup. And our souls have set up all of these key experiences for us so that we can learn, grow, and evolve as a soul. And that's it. So if we can start to understand that as a concept intellectually to begin with, that's a great start. And then the work is to observe ourselves, use a lot of self-reflection and observe what is this self-thinking? What are the
Mm.
thoughts? What are the emotions here? And start to detach from them in terms of looking at them objectively rather than subjectively. And then we take it less seriously. We take life less seriously. It's okay. It's not that
Mm.
serious. It's not high stakes. You can get to go again. There's many lives that we live. So it's all right. And it seems to the ego very, very serious. I've got to earn 10 million. I've got to 10 times my income. It's all these external pursuits that the ego will have us engaging in. But we never can find what we're looking for in that place outside of us. What we're looking for is inside, and all the answers are there. It's all always there.
Mm.
um, it's just a case of going in, which is why I said earlier it's an inside job. So self-reflection is the key. And self-reflection is simply, what's my mind thinking right now? And observing those thoughts rather than getting caught by them.
Mm.
I see my mind is saying I'm useless. Well, why don't I challenge that? I can challenge that thought because it's just a thought. It's not true. It's just a story. What if I challenged it? What would happen then? And what if I replaced it with something more kind or compassionate? Like, well, I'm doing my best. And then there happens this subtle shift where we start to feel just slightly better about ourselves, just slightly. But if
Mm.
we do that enough as a practice, not a perfect, as a practice, then we start to feel better about ourselves and about the things that we're engaged in. And that's the real process of the inner work. That's how we can start to change it. That's how we can stay being a lawyer, a partner, a husband, a wife, a mother,
Mm.
a father. We can continue those roles. And I think it's important that we understand I am not preaching go and live in a cave. Like, no way. This is about bringing the essence of the teachings and philosophy and experience of the East and using them in applying those wisdoms in our modern life to be happier and healthier, to have good mental health, to have good emotional intelligence, to be anchored in a place that is from higher guidance rather than the ego.
Beautiful. And what do you think about the opposite of that, which is pushing into the emotion? Like I heard there, which was, let's say, for example, I'm like, oh, I'm not good enough, or there's an underlying feeling of that.
Mm,
Because sometimes you don't hear the thought, you can feel it, or you can
yes.
see it or something. What if instead you fully went into that? You're like, yeah, like I love not being good enough. Like this serves me in so many ways, like almost like the Jungian shadow
Mm,
work kind of style. How do you feel about
yes.
that approach?
Yeah, it's a great approach. It's very confronting for a lot of people when I have to
Mm.
relate to my emotions. I don't want to sit here with my emotion. It doesn't feel good.
Mm.
We typically we are rigged to avoid pain
Mhm.
and move towards pleasure. And so by relating to unwanted emotions, it can often feel painful, and people will naturally move towards pleasure. And so the more that we can start to relate to these emotions from an innocent bystander perspective rather than owning the emotion, then it reduces the pain of it. So if we can observe it and have compassion for it, there's a great poem by Rumi called The Guest House. And it literally is the best instruction for how to relate with and regulate your emotions. And I'm going to be misquoting him here, but he basically says, he's talking
Do you want
about,
to get up in front of us?
sorry?
Did you want me to get that up in front of us?
Oh,
The
yeah, if
quote.
you can. Yeah, great.
Yeah,
If you
absolutely. Give
want
me
to.
2 seconds.
While you do that, I'll talk about the premise of it. So the premise of it is he's talking about the guest house, and what he's talking about is welcoming emotions, welcoming all painful thoughts, all painful emotions as guests into your house, and the house being ourself. And what he's saying is welcome them all because they all have something to teach us. And it's such a profound teaching. Rumi was a Sufi poet and a master. Yeah, is this being human is a guest house every morning a new arrival. So he's talking here about the thing we call self is just a guest house. It's a hotel for the soul. So it's not permanent. The soul's permanent. The being, the human self is like the avatar. It's a shell that the soul pours itself into to have an experience, and we can taste and touch and smell, and that's amazing. Like souls can't do that, so souls are
Mm.
really excited to get into this human shell. And every morning a new arrival, and a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. So he's talking about the juxtaposition here between our emotions that we feel. They can be joyful, or we can feel depressed, we can feel mean, or sometimes there's a flicker where the light switch goes on and we're a little bit more awake and we go, I can see what's happening. And
Yeah.
I'm not depression. I am not mean. It's just that I feel mean. And then he says, welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture, still treat them honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. So he's saying depression has a purpose, meanness has a purpose, joy has a purpose. So he's essentially saying all emotion have a purpose. And when I read that, it just blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, rather than seeing emotions as something painful that I have to sit with, if I see
Mm-hmm.
them as red flags and they're trying to tell me something, they're bringing me important data, important information. And if I can just understand what this emotion is trying to bring me, then what happens is the emotion goes, okay, I've delivered my message. I can go now. So all we have to do is get the message, like get the memo. And then he talks about, he says, it will clear you out. And basically he's saying, once you understand the information that the emotion is giving you, then you'll start to feel the joy of that it will bring you delight, because you have what I call realizations. You have a new realizations. You've learned something. And that's what life is about. It's about learning. He talks about the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them all at the door laughing and invite them in. In other words, they're not you. They're guests.
Mm.
So you don't have to be scared of them. Welcome them, relate to them, sit with them and ask them, why are you here? Depression, why are you here? I've been depressed. I spent 3 years in a deep, dark depression. And I learned so much from that period of my life, so much. And he says, be grateful for whoever comes. He's talking about the emotions, because each is sent as a guide from beyond. Very, very powerful. So,
Beautiful.
yeah.
And what do you feel about other factors? I know you said the internal is all that controls the external. What do you feel about, like, let's say, for example, someone has some health issues, like they have maybe an autoimmune disease, or they have
Mm.
gut health issues. Do
Mm.
you feel like that contributes to it, and that should be something to be looked at?
Yes, everything. I had 20 years of irritable bowel syndrome. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, I couldn't eat very much at all. I think I
Mm.
got down to boiled rice and chicken at the time. That was the only thing I could eat that wouldn't send me into hospital. Like, it was so chronic. And
Wow.
and I tried all the Western medicines, everything that I could. And after 20 years, I had no option but to look elsewhere. So I started looking at alternative therapies. That's what led me to Ayurvedic medicine. And I started to learn really what was going on in the body. I started to understand about the elements, the Panchabhutas, the 5 elements, the basic elements of life. I learned how life is created. I learned the 9 stages of disease. And I learned very basically that all that was happening in my body, Western medicine said it's incurable. All I learned was that my body, my fire had gone out, my internal fire had gone out. So if you think of your digestion as a fire, mine had gone out. I was doing a fire job as a lawyer. That's a fire job. So I understood that the fire job needed a lot of fire. And my natural body template, my natural body makeup doesn't have much fire. I'm mainly ether or space and a little bit of water. So I was doing a fire job. I didn't have much fire, and I wasn't replacing my fire. I wasn't stoking or kindling my fire. So my fire went out. So I had no digestive fire. That's why I couldn't eat anything. My body
Mm.
couldn't digest. And because I was adding to, my body was more fire, I couldn't digest it. So it was too much fire. So it basically put my digestion out. So all I had to do was stoke my fire. I cured myself in 3 months.
Yeah. Wow.
whilst I was a lawyer,
Wow.
just by changing what I ate, and stoking my fire with spicy foods, foods that were easier to digest. I stopped eating raw food for a while, just so I could stoke my fire a little bit. I started doing exercise to sweat so I could get a sweat going. And it took 3 months, and I was totally cured, and it's never come back since. So, when you know how to balance the elements, a very powerful practice, not just for your physical state, but also for your emotional state and your mental state. And
Mm.
the yogis um, talk about the balancing of the bhutas, the five elements, as a way of life, a way of balancing mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects of self.
Mm.
Learn how to do that, we can live a very happy, very healthy life. And I'm not saying, it's a cure all for everyone, because there's karma, and karma isn't a bad thing. It's an isness. Karma is, sometimes as a soul, we choose a body that has ill health so that we can learn from that perspective. We can understand what it's like to be in a wheelchair. We can understand what it's like to spend 3 years depressed. And from my experience of that, I can relate to people better in my work because I've seen it from the inside. I know what it feels like. I've had a history of PTSD. I grew up in a family of domestic violence. So I didn't get diagnosed with PTSD till much later on in life. I know what it's like to suffer from anxiety, crippling anxiety and panic attacks. Um,
Mm.
and so, I'm not sitting here going, yeah, I have the perfect answer. But what I do know is these practices that I learned from the East lend themselves very well to healing, growing, evolving. And, as I sit here today, I'm happy and healthy. And I've overcome many of those things and share what I've learned with other people.
That's beautiful. And this is probably an unconventional question, but if and I'm going to use my own terminology here, but if the Vedic teachings, if the Eastern philosophies, if there was something that was, what word should I use, incorrect or like maybe overlooked, what would it be? Because a lot of people are, there's spiritual communities in Sydney,
Mm,
across the world, and you could call it the ego, you can call it any form of thing, but there tends to be a lot of biases and a lot of
mm,
bypassing and things like that. And for me, as someone who's been in those communities and
mm,
on the outside of those communities, I see a lot of behavior that isn't particularly desirable. And
mm.
I wonder if you think that if it's just us being humans and that's just the way humans are, or if there's something in the teachings that we ought to keep an eye on.
It's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I have so much to say about that. Where to start? First of all, I want to say this: never throw the baby out with the bathwater. What I mean by that is all teachers are fundamentally flawed because they have a human ego. Unless you're working with an enlightened master who doesn't have a human ego, is just pure consciousness, and that's very rare. But I do and have met one or two in my travels. Then and there's a difference between gurus and teachers. Okay, a teacher is a human who has learned some wisdom and is sharing that wisdom. They're not infallible, they're human, they have an ego, and so their following will have the same egoic lessons to learn than the teacher. And
Hmm.
so when I say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, what I mean is take the teachings, but then check your own ego and be aware that there will be ego in that community. And so we can learn from teachers, but we also have to be aware that there'll be ego mixed in with that. And never assume that a spiritual community is more conscious than a rugby community, or a golfing community, or whatever community it is. we're all just doing our best, and there's ego in everything. As you and I are talking right now, there's ego right here. So we're all just learning and growing. And my teacher says to me, we're all helping each other all of the time. So even that ego in the community and those biases, that helps us too, because when we see what we don't like, then we can say to ourselves, where might that be in me that's unloved? Where might that be in my,
Mm.
and that's something to help us too. So it's all there to help us, and nothing's perfect. It's all perfect in the imperfection of it.
Mm. And do you think it's better to orientate ourselves in the world by looking at what humans have done, all the bad things, human nature based on examples? Or do you believe it's more empowering to look at what humans can be, enlightened, pure consciousness and whatnot, or both?
It's definitely both, because once
Hmm.
we come into a third dimensional reality, I mean, a physical reality, there is duality. There is black and there is white, and there is the whole spectrum in between. And so we have to love it all. As Rumi says, embrace it all, welcome it all. It's all a lesson, whether it's light or dark, it all helps us learn something. And I think that's where people, for a long time, I couldn't see suffering in the world and not get upset. It was very hard for me to see animals being cruelly treated, to see people being, mistreated, abused, objectified, and I couldn't work it out. I was like, well, how can there be a God? How can there be consciousness? How can there be love? And then this, why? And it took me a long time to have a realization that it's all one, it's all consciousness. And having an experience of that helps us realize it's like the life that we see physically is literally like a movie screen. When you go to the movies and you get your chopped up and your popcorn, and you know who you are, and you're the person eating the chopped top, and it's going to drip all over your jeans, and so you lean forward and you're having your chopped, and the screen's in front of you, and you're watching a screen. And in the
Mm.
beginning, you're still aware, you're chatting to your friends, but about 5 to 10 minutes in, you're no longer this you that's eating the chopped top and the popcorn. You're in the movie. And, when the cars are moving, you're swaying. And when the hero's dying, you're crying. And you're so involved in the movie that you think it's real, but it's not. It's not real. It's real when you're in it, feels really real, but ultimately it's all just a setup. And at the end of the day, we get to walk away and go, oh, it was a great movie. And that role that you played where you really was a real mean person to me, so I learned about self-respect and boundaries. You did a great job. Thank you so much. So
Mm.
we start to learn that it's not as big a stake as we think. And it's all here for us to learn. If we see something that we don't like, then rather than fight against it, ask ourselves, what can we stand for rather than against? Because if we fight against something, we create more anger in the world. We just dump more anger into the collective consciousness. So we have
Mm.
to treat everything with compassion and empathy, and understand that there are people with different levels of consciousness on the planet. And it's like saying, I expect a 2-year-old to know quantum physics. They're not going to. And that doesn't mean that the professor who knows quantum physics is any better or more value than the 2-year-old. It's just different. That's all.
Mm.
That's
Mm.
And having an experience of that is what flipped it for me. But we have to it's good to know these concepts, because the mind can then hang its hat on something a little bit different.
Mm. Yeah, I guess I see in that a lot, especially in the communities around the world and also just in individuals, right? Let's just say individuals, where they'll use spirituality as a tool
Mm.
to be bigger and better than, or to get away with things that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to get away with. It's like a new religion in a way, right? And it's
Mm.
become this thing.
Mm.
And obviously, like if you're if you're critical enough, you can think to yourself like, well, obviously, like individuals, that's the bigger picture is that people just do that because that's what we're like and we have an
Mm,
ego and so forth. But I just wonder if that, yeah, same with Christianity, same with other religions out there. Like you tend to, you have those certain personality type that will take it very seriously,
mm,
almost like an extremist,
mm.
and they'll follow it word for word.
Yeah.
And very similar to like reading an Eckhart Tolle book,
Yes.
they'll pick it up and they'll like word for word, like I need to be this, 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 this.
Mm,
So I guess I just wonder, like, for me, you mentioned black and white thinking, and I think that
mm,
black and white thinking has its utility. There's
mm,
a dualistic nature in all things, and I think that
mm.
the utility of black and white is you can clearly say like this is black and this is white.
Yes.
Whereas the personality types, and I'm just using that as a phrase, I don't mean
Mm,
anyone specific or anything specifically, but when it comes to that, you can just say, well, that's that. Like, there's no grounding, and you can go really high up, like, but you don't go very far down, and you kind of like just wiggle around in reality. And for me, sometimes there is a bit of resentment there because I feel like, yeah, there's just this lack of responsibility sometimes from those people in that space. So that's my thing. I'm just sharing my experience with spirituality in general.
I would say that if we look at something,
Mm,
it's like this. If we look at something and we have a reaction of resentment, then if we can look at what is triggering that in us, that's the
mm,
work.
mm,
Otherwise, we're in ego, blame, judgment. And whenever we're judging, we're in ego. And so to flip it, we can say, well, where is that resentment coming from in me? What is it in me that's being triggered? And that's the work, because that liberates us. When I can understand why someone is really, you know, getting under my skin, and I understand what it is in me that I haven't learned to love, or what it is in me that hasn't found peace with that, then I can let it go, and then that thing changes. That's what people don't get is when I change me, I can't control the outside world, but I can change my reaction to things. And when I can change my reaction to things and flip from resentment to understanding, maybe, or compassion, then that thing will change. Either that
mm,
person will leave my life or they will get a personality transplant. And that's literally happened to me so many times because they are
mm.
just there in my life to teach me about the things I need to learn.
What if the resentment is something that you desire to have because it drives you to be someone in integrity, right? For me, like my experience in the past is, in 2015, I think it was, I had a very a satori moment, they would say, right, which is where I was sitting on the train. I remember I was catching the train into work, and on the blue line from Cronulla to Bondi
Mm.
into the city, and I was reading, I think it was not the power of now, A New Earth. And I
Yes.
read this one verse, and I was sitting there on the train,
Mm.
and I had this, something just flipped inside of me,
Mm.
and I looked outside, and like the coal pieces on the track were like dancing diamonds. They were just like, everything was like glistening, and then the trees were like speaking to me in a weird way, and like, that feeling, right? And I looked up all the people on the train. I didn't see the people as like their facial expressions of like, oh, he's grumpy or he's that. Everyone had all the pain of the world in them, but all the joy in the world of them at the same time, and
Mm.
they were just living on different spectrums of that specific experience.
Yes.
And I had that experience, and I'd been seeking an experience like that for a long time.
Mm.
Like growing up with tons of social anxiety,
Mm.
growing up with and then the way that I dealt with that was with alcohol. Like I would drink and drink and drink, and that was my way of trying to connect.
Mm.
So I had this experience, and I've been seeking that for a long time. It mainly came from trying to remove this social anxiety. It's like, well, the more present I become, the more I can remove this anxiety. I've been
Mm.
meditating for 3 years, 3 or 4 years at that point in time, and this experience happened, and then that lasted for about maybe 3 or 4 weeks, give or take. And I was in that state for 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah. and I didn't change anything. I didn't like say, well, I'm going to stop drinking now. I'm going to do this.
Mm.
I still did all the things that I'd ordinarily do, but it had this undertone. Like I would eat pizza and it was like, whoa, like I'm just sitting there like it's almost this orgasmic experience.
Mm.
And then with alcohol, the same thing. I'd have it, and it wasn't this desire to get drunk. It was just like I'm just drinking, and it was just like this weird. I don't know. It was a weird experience, but in all the best ways. And
Mm.
so coming full circle, I had more experiences like that with Joe Dispenza's stuff and like floating and feeling like I'm walking 5 centimeters above the ground. Like I'm sure you're aware of these things, and I eventually went into the spiritual community in Sydney here, and it was great fun. You know, ecstatic dancing, doing all these kind of things, and but as time went along, like there was you know, for me at least, like I really strongly believe that, and of course things happen in life and whatever, but and doing the right thing, there's a moral nature to life. You know what I mean? And I just saw so much of that behavior of like little things here and there where people would use spirituality to get away with things. You know,
Mm.
get away with taking responsibility.
Mm.
So when I say resentment and when I talk about emotions, for me, it used to be about feeling those emotions and letting them flow through me.
Mm.
Whereas now I feel empowered when I feel those emotions and I fully embrace them. If
Mm.
I feel anger, I put classical music on and I go for a walk and I just feel all the anger, I feel all the pain, all the suffering. If I feel
Mm.
resentment, I feel it as well, and then I start thinking about my own life where I'm not being in integrity.
Mm.
So the emotions become a tool. So I
Mm.
guess when I hear sometimes spirituality being a way to let emotions go, I
Mm.
think sometimes people jump over the learning curve that emotion can give you.
Mm.
And that's my thoughts around that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And everything ultimately is a method, right? A method for that, what you have just experienced, which is a soul awakening. It's a method. You know, we all need a method, and we're all on different paths. And I say all roads lead to Rome. All roads lead to Rome. Whether we are, you know, going to church and listening to a preacher every day and being told right from wrong, or we're working with a master or a yogi or a guru, all roads eventually lead to Rome. And each road will serve the particular soul where they're at. And it's all perfect. And so, but ultimately, we have to let go of the method, because the method itself is a trap, right? So
Mm,
ultimately we get so far, but then ultimately the method has to go, and we have to, there's this leap of faith, it's called the leap of faith, where we have to go into that abyss and experience the self as consciousness, pure consciousness. And you've had that experience, you've been lucky enough that that happened to you. And that's what happened to me when I first meditated. I went into that. It was like going through the portal, right? And experiencing, and I had it for 3 days, where I was aware that I was a person walking about, but I was also aware that there's just love. There's just love. There's just love in every pixel of life. And I had it recently in an airport of all places. You know, I went to the airport. It was insane. It was just after COVID. The queues were snaking around, you know, and normally I would have lost it. Normally I'd have been angry and frustrated. Oh my God, blah, blah. And something just flipped inside of me as I walked in. And it was like everything went pixelated. The whole scene went pixelated. And it was like I pierced the veil of illusion, and I could feel just pure love. And it was like I was inside a TV screen, and I could see all the pixels. So I could still see people moving, I could hear everything. But at the same time, I felt this immense love. And it was like everything was just one consciousness of love. And I was bawling my eyes out in a queue for 2 hours. People must have thought I was crazy. Just, and all I could feel and experience was, this is just so beautiful. People and noise and light and sounds. And, you know, it was just so beautiful.
mm. And do you love the emotions? Like I love those experiences. They're great, right?
No
Have
drugs, no drugs needed, right?
all
Nat-
is required is an airport. That's what Sydney Airport.
Natural high.
Do you love the bad emotions as much as the positive ones?
Do I love them? I say that my ego doesn't. My ego never wants them. My ego will first rush up and go, no, not this, no. And usually I'll pull a patience card and you'll be like, no, I don't want to be patient. My ego, just wants pleasure. So then it's stepping back and observing, okay, I usually have a little bit of a pity party for a couple of hours, maybe a couple of days, depending on what's going on. And then I dig into the work and I go, okay, well, what's here for me? What do I need to learn? What do I need to understand? And I will spend time in self-reflection and look at myself and look at my ego and actually offer my ego love and compassion and say, it's okay. What do you need? I'm here for you. What do you need, beloved? And love myself through it, through the pain, through whatever it is, and so, of course, I have a human part of me as well. So it's about figuring this human part of self out as well and learning to love all parts of it and embracing it and learning from it. It's very enriching. And does it feel good at the time? No, it sucks. It really sucks. But can we liberate ourselves from that? Can we grow from that and learn from that? 1,000,000%.
And what do you want from the world? Like, what is your idea? Well, not want, but what do you feel? What's your utopia of the world? I know that's the wrong word, but what would you like to see from the world? Like, what's your vision for the world if you create it yourself?
Yeah, I'm not going to, because I know that there is a consciousness, or there are other beings that have got the world. They've got it. There's always going to be the right balance of light and dark. So it's not my trolley. It's not for me to worry about that. And for me, it's just about, what can I do while I'm here? How can I put my hat in the ring and do something that will relieve some suffering somewhere? What part do I have to play in this? Understanding that it's all perfect, all of the suffering, all of the pain, all of the harshness, not being passive, not being aggressive, but playing my part, doing my bit. And I think if each individual can kind of just do their part, understand that they have an important role too in the collective consciousness, then things would be a little easier. But we're not here for easy anyway, so we don't come here for easy, because that would be boring to the soul. The soul doesn't learn anything. We learn through pain and suffering, unfortunately. It's a carrot or the stick. We usually will wait for the stick.
There's a quote by Dostoevsky, which is a Russian novelist, and he says that if we created utopia on Earth, we would soon destroy it because humans are geared towards adventure, not towards utopia.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we are here, to experience the polarities of life. And so it's all perfect, and we can still play our part and help people, help animals, help the planet. It doesn't need us, but isn't it wonderful for us to do something so that we can evolve as souls and contribute? It's all about contribution.
And involving souls, where does that lead to? What's the target? What's the goal?
I don't know. Like, I don't know. It's all cyclical. It's like saying, the ego will have everything in black and white and linear. There's an end goal. There is no end goal. It's never done. It's constantly evolving. If you look at the universe, there's no start and there's no end. I was watching on Netflix that show about infinity. Just blew my mind. It was like, how can you explain infinity? Your head, your rational brain can't get your head around it. But if you choose to accept that it's all perfect, it's never done, it's a cycle. It's like saying, I'm in winter and we just need to get to summer. Let's just get to summer. And what I would say is enjoy the winter, because that too brings its richness. That too brings, information and potential for growth. And it's beautiful too. So it's all perfect. It's never done. And where can I play my part?
It's almost like you have two types of people in this world to a degree, which is, and I'm labeling here intentionally.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so people who look for that thing in the external, they build a big business. You can have some of your biggest figures in the world that have caused tons of suffering, pain, and the Stalins and I'll go on that list, but all those people who do that, and they're looking for that thing,
Mm,
right? And they think the more they do externally, the more they can get to that
mm,
point. Then
yes.
you have the people in a cave,
Mm,
or people who are pursuing just a spiritual path, who are
mm,
going completely internally, and each has its own how would you say, downsides and upsides, but really we're searching for the same thing by the sounds of it to a degree, which is, you can call it a feeling, call it that flow, you can call it riding the wave, and you feel like nothing exists, like, whoa, look at this, or that spiritual experience. And when you're in that state, speaking from my own experience, like when stress comes up or when emotions come up that in the past would have affected you, you just start laughing. You're like, you're like, look at this emotion. Like, not even saying that, you just start laughing because
mm.
there's nothing else to do besides laugh, and just becomes this hilarious thing. It's like, well, look, there's me trying to run a tight knot around myself again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's it. And it's so liberating when we can live life like that, when we can observe these aspects of our beautiful egos and not take it so seriously, and know that all is well. Always, it's always going to be fine. When we're currently as a collective consciousness in a Kali Yuga, a dark age. And so it's a great opportunity for us as souls to grow and build a really good karma, because it's very difficult to do good things in a dark age. Our minds get infiltrated with very dark thoughts. And so compared to a golden age, which, everyone's doing the right thing, and so you can't really build good karma credits because everyone's doing the right thing. So souls actually rush to incarnate in a dark age, because we get to eat up and transmute a lot of our karma by doing good things. And so it's a very rich time at the moment for each soul to build up some good karma credits, do good, serve, forgive, and it will help you liberate yourself, but it also then contributes back to this beautiful thing that's a spinning rock in the middle of infinity. If we take it out there, we're not really that important, are we?
we're important, but we're also not important. I think it's dualistic, right?
Yes, absolutely. We're everything and no thing. And the head will never understand that. It's an
Hmm.
experience. Once we have that experience, then we draw on the experience of it. And that's, for me anyway, personally, like it probably is for you, Luke, that for me, that experience is my anchor. That's my anchor
Hmm.
when my mind is going back into anxiety, which it does sometimes. I can come back to that experience of profound bliss and
Mm.
anchor myself back into that. And if everyone could experience that, wouldn't that be wonderful?
I think everyone has, but they've just forgotten.
Yeah, and it's a setup. We're meant to forget.
So we go through the journey again. It's like another Alan Watts quote. He's like, what does he say? We are the aperture through which the whole universe looks at itself. So it's like we're looking at ourselves, looking at ourselves, looking at ourselves. So we've gone through that experience, but we've done
Mm.
so many looking back and forth that we've forgotten that experience.
Yes, and it's intentional so that we can look with fresh eyes. There's nothing more beautiful than looking at something for the first time, and what being amazed by it. And
Hmm.
that's such a beautiful quote, and it's so true on every level. And even just having conversations like this, I think, helps people have some different hooks for their mind to start to have a different perspective of life, because we can get very ensconced, all social media and TV, and we're on screens constantly these days. There's a rare time that the only time we're off them is when we're literally asleep. And so we're just being bombarded with the opposite of that, get more stuff, more outside of you, buy more stuff, find more stuff, have more stuff. And that pulls us away from that experience of oneness, that experience of deep connection. And so if we can just start by, detoxing off the screens for an hour or so a day, a minute a day, I know wherever you're at with it, just detox from that for a little while. It's really going to help in a big, big way.
Yeah, there's a book called The Shallows by a guy called, what's his name? I forget it. Not Carl Newport. Anyways, there's a book out there called The Shallows, really good book, and he talks about a study where they showed that contemplation, right, which to contemplate you need the absence of stimulation, leads to more compassion and empathy, and also it improves memory, it's a whole bunch of things. So for me, when I read that, I'm like, whoa, because I've grown up with technology for the most part. I mean, we all have to a degree, right? I'm 28 at the moment, and at the moment, that's funny. And for me, like most of my life has been my phone and all these things. So to go outside and just to walk in the park without my phone, it's a mental exercise, And for me, like I used to meditate every single morning, 20 minutes every single morning, sometimes more, sometimes an hour each morning. And now I don't meditate at all. I put that into doing work sprints for 45 minutes and just like really flowing with the work and not letting it be something that's done out of a place of spite, if that makes sense, of like I ought to be doing this, or ought to be like pushing and like, oh, I really want to listen to this podcast, do this, like just letting it flow and like just like bringing back attention all the time. So that's sort of a useful practice to have for sure.
Very powerful way to live. It really is. Meditation is just the warm up. People think meditation's the end game. It's just the warm up.
Flossing.
It's flossing. I love that. Meditation's flossing. It's just the warm up. It's just the prep for us to then have a capacity to still the mind, to quiet the mind enough that we can actually see. And that's all it is. And, that contemplation is the key to it. Self-inquiry brings self-awareness, and then we're able to self-support. I call it the C strategy. Self-inquiry brings self-awareness, which allows us to self-support. If we self-reflect, if we contemplate, to use your word, then we know something that we didn't know before. And then with that new realization, we can help ourselves from a different perspective. And that's all we ever have to do is self-contemplate, self-reflect. That's where the real power is. And meditation just helps us to quiet the mind enough to be able to do that. But if we're constantly on screens, then we're pulled out. We're just pulled out constantly. And that's where the suffering comes from, you see. So depression is deep rest to help us come back to self. We've gone too far out. So it just helps us come back and slow everything down and take a moment and go within. That's where the beauty is, the bliss, the happiness, the joy, the everything that everyone is looking for. And you can get it all from that place, So it's it's a very powerful place to live.
That's beautiful. And if there's one thing you want to share with the audience, anyone listening, or just people in general, or just even just me, what would you like to share?
Well, we've shared a lot today, Luke, already.
We have.
I would say that for me, the game changer has been something that's really moved the dial, has been to work with someone who's more enlightened with me, who just emanates love. And I would say, and it's going to be controversial, and I'm not, a card carrier of anything, but to have a guru, for me, what's changed is to have a guru, for me, has It's like a cheat in the game, and gaming. So if you're gaming and there's all you go, you go to a level and you die and then you have to do it all over again. It's literally a reflection of life. There is a cheat in this game called life, and working with a master is like getting the cheat and going up all the levels real fast, because it's like having the Olympic flame light your flame, and then your flame can grow really fast, really bright. And so any work that we can do to ignite that flame within, and what am I talking about with the flame? I'm talking about your Kundalini Shakti, your own power. That power, it's called light, illumination, your energies inside of you. Once they're awakened, all solutions come.
Beautiful. I love that. And where can people find you?
I'm on all the socials and my website, www.anjaniamriit.com. It's just my name.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Look, thanks for the amazing, rich conversation.
And thank you.